Today's seminar is around signage. Again, it will be hosted by Caroline Constantine, MD of Right Directions, myself, Head of Development, and Ian Warren, Head of Health and Safety. Now, just heads up, Ian is experiencing technical problems this morning, and we're hoping that he's on the call. Well, we know he is at the minute, but he keeps dropping out. If by any chance he does drop out, Caroline will take over and steer the rest of the clinic today. So the aims of today: stimulate thought and discussion on COVID-19 awareness signage that you may need and how you should display it within your facilities. The key factors, hopefully, that we will get out by the end of the clinic are to provide staff and customers with confidence in the arrangements for controlling the spread of COVID-19, provide staff and customers with information on how to keep themselves safe, and provide customers with information on facilities and activities available. Again, as we've always say, we are using our operational experience, including our health and safety knowledge, to develop these clinics, taking on board government advice and also the NGB advice, which is slowly dripping out into the industry. So with no further ado, I will pass you over to Caroline to start the webinar. Thank you and enjoy.
Good morning, everybody. It suddenly occurred to me when we are allowed back into the shops in the next couple of weeks, we'll know who's been furloughed and who hasn't, for who's got the suntan and who hasn't. I'm certainly one of the ones who hasn't yet, so hopefully it'll be nice weather at the weekend. Right, quick recap for those of you who are new. Apologies for those of you who've sat in on all the seminars. These are the things that have been on the previous clinics. You are welcome to look at those on YouTube, and we will be sending out all the clinics to everybody. So those are the things that have been covered. I'm not going to go through that list again, but by all means help yourself to our previous clinics. As with all of these, we're going to stick with our 4 S's. These are the simple messages that we're going to make sure that all staff and customers are aware of. Spacing, social distancing, sanitising, keeping everything clean and hygienic, what's signage, and obviously that's what we're discussing today, and making sure we're supervising and smiling and monitoring customers where they are and what they're doing. Covering today, signage. Now, what we're going to cover today is the provision of professional, effective signage, advising customers and staff of social distancing and hygiene measures in place. We're going to look at ensuring signage depicts facilities and activities post-opening, and we're going to make sure the prominent signage is displayed in all relevant areas to draw attention to rules and arrangements. It's not exhaustive, and it is just our ideas, but hopefully we won't be teaching you guys all to suck eggs, and we will be giving you a few fresh ideas that you may not have thought about. One thing I'm going to say, and I know Ian will reiterate it lots and lots of times throughout this presentation, the signage should be based on risk assessment. You do not go and buy 500 stickers and slap them all over the floor. That's not effective when potentially you may want more signage in one place and less in another. So we will reiterate it over and over again: risk assess, risk assess, risk assess, where you think the clusters of people are going to be in activities. And Ian is going to go into that in more detail, hopefully, if he's still online. Okay, I'm going to hand it over to Ian.
Hi, hopefully the technology will survive. I've turned the video off to try and make sure my internet connection remains stronger today. So you haven't got to put up with looking at me. As Caroline just started off there, I think we need to be very clear that the signage you decide on needs to come from the risk assessment. Signage is at the bottom of the hierarchy of control, and where possible, other measures such as control measures should be considered, i.e. getting people to come in bookable slots so that we're not ending up with massive queues, or pinch points are going to be the more effective initially, although you are going to need signage. So let's start by looking. First off, you need to walk your centre and look what signage you currently have and whether you still need it. Leisure centres typically have lots of signage, and we need to make sure that the COVID-19 signage is relevant and is not missed. Less is more, remember, and we know lots of centres have decluttered their signage, and therefore some of this isn't necessarily going to be that relevant, but do make sure that you've got no out-of-date signage, i.e. you're not still advertising Easter half-term activities, and where things conflict, make sure that the rules that you currently exhibit in certain areas aren't going to conflict with your COVID-19 guidance rules. Clearly, cafe menus at this point in time, we don't know when cafes are going to be able to reopen other than for takeaways. Club information, again, it will depend on what clubs come back and how they're going to operate. So think through what's already displayed, and on the less is more, take down what isn't needed and what isn't relevant. And remember out-of-date leaflets that also could cause confusion. The other thing which I would say, many of you use digital display formats. Again, make sure they're updated and are consistently in line with the messages that you're going to be drawing from your risk assessment. Next page, please. So there will be lots of signage that is statutory, stuff that you need that you won't be able to get rid of. So make sure when you're going around this walk and thinking what you can take away, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. We're not asking you to take everything down, but make sure they remain prominent and relevant. Clearly pool rules might have changed, park rules in the trampoline parks might have changed. So consider what needs to be there, what necessary signage as the starting point for considering what extra that you're going to need to put in place. Directional signage, even if temporary, if you're creating one-way systems, think about how they're going to be put, not on the side walls where people can't see it, but directly ahead of the flow of traffic. And I'll come on to that in a little bit in a minute, because we don't want fired doors and glazed areas indoors covered by signs. Next slide, please. Now this signage we've trailed in other clinics, in that it is the statutory signage that the government have issued for workplace. And I would imagine they will issue something similar for our sector when it comes out. You will probably need to think about displaying this in your staff areas, where it's your commitment to your staff of how you're going to keep them safe. There could well be a similar one coming out, or you might wish to adapt it to put to display for customers to see as well. And it's really your commitment to staff and customers in how you're going to try and keep them safe. As we know, the government has stated they wish that to be displayed on the website, where you've got over 50 employees in the organisation as a whole. We think we know the reason for that, in that if the HSE get a complaint about your organisation, they're going to go and look for your risk assessments, which you have posted on your website before bothering to come and hassle you on site. So make sure your risk assessments are good, that those signs are displayed if in relevant areas. Next slide, please. So these are the types of signs that you're going to be thinking about. Probably this is a good example of what not to do. 3 different styles of signs. I know many of you are going to want to think about having a corporate image. There are many people out there offering bog standard signage, but you'll probably want to make quite an impact with yours and use existing companies perhaps from within the leisure industry that understand our business, so people like Big Wave, and there are others out there that you might wish to look for, and to help design the posters in such a way that they are really hitting the key messages that you want to give. Clearly you're going to want one that talks about symptoms and asking customers that are exhibiting signs of coronavirus not to attend. The old one, that was from about 8-9 years ago from the government, the Catch It, Bin It, Kill It campaign, which came in when the flu epidemic of 2013-14 killed so many people and didn't get reported in the same way. And whether you want to use a stay alert, control virus, it's up to you within your risk assessment. But the specific thing is to make sure your messages are clear and consistent. And coming back to stage 1, I feel you need to start this outside of your buildings. We've all been to supermarkets, we've all been into other facilities, banks, etc. over the lockdown period. And the ones that give you confidence are the ones that clearly mark out demarcation areas, queuing systems, how they're wanting people to control how they're standing, and providing easy reminders of what 2 meters really means. As Caroline said, though, we're not suggesting you go out and buy 50,000 2 meter signs if it's not relevant, because hopefully the messages will have got through to people on the way in, and most people are used to it by now. And just remember, at some point we might need, hopefully, to remove these. So don't go and paint on the floor yellow lines. Try and make sure that whatever you put down has got the ability to be removable at some point in the future, when this becomes a distant memory. These again are typical examples of what I've just said, in that you need to think of the styles that you want, and create an image in your own that takes into account our industry. Certainly some of the in-house industry publishers will have a greater understanding of things like gender identity being very PC in the way posters are produced, which maybe some of these aren't, but these are just examples of social distancing posters and one-way systems that you might consider. Okay, next slide, please. This again, under our S's, the sanitization, I think there's 2 types of signage here, one for customers and one for your staff. Clearly you'll want to train staff coming back in about making sure they use good hand washing techniques. There has been quite extensive studies done that show people who wash their hands properly at least 6 times a day are far less likely to contract coronavirus than people who don't wash their hands or don't wash them properly. So giving good advice, not treating it glibly, making sure you train staff that when they are in the workplace that they follow those simple procedures are going to protect them, protect you, and protect your customers. And then there are ones like the red one at the bottom, which are going to be far more customer focused, far more user friendly, and ones which state the same message but which perhaps are done in slightly less dictatorial fashion. So you need to think about the style of signage you're putting in different areas, backs of toilet doors, over sinks, in areas where people are going to be coming into contact of having touch points and being reminded maybe to wash their hands. Next page, please. So what other signage or notices might you need? You need to consider the other facilities within your buildings, ones where other things might not be operating in the same way under the same hours. I mentioned doors a few seconds ago. We would ask you to think where you put these. Maybe a door into the creche might be appropriate, but a door in a corridor where somebody has to stop and read something is not appropriate. We want to reduce pinch points. Doors might be appropriate for a one-way system or a no exit sign, but not for anything that people have to stop and read. So think through how you're displaying it, and clearly any glazed areas within doors are meant to be there so people can see where they're going to whack somebody when they sling the door open, and not for use for putting up signage, easy though it is sometimes. Think about the restrictions. Some of you may reduce some of the sessions you're running, not offer slides or flume sessions. You need to make sure your customers know that before they come in and pay, so there aren't arguments later on. And again, digital displays might be one effective way of prominently demonstrating this on arrival and on your website. So think through what information you wish to impart to your customers. We are beginning to see quite a bit of information flowing out of other hopeful sectors within the business world, hoping that they will be able to open, and how they'll open it, that they're beginning to disseminate to customers. So keep your eyes on what other people are doing. Take some of it with a pinch of salt, but think how you're going to turn that into making your controls effective, your signage professional, and give confidence to your customers and staff. Clearly other things, refunds, extensions of policies might be things that could be put on to save face-to-face contact and debates over, I want a refund for this. Opening times if different, admission policies clearly if different. and booking arrangements, encouraging people to pay by contactless where they can. Although I do hope, and this is a personal view, we don't completely do away with cash, because not everybody has the benefit of being able to use cards, but that you develop safe means where people do bring in cash for the touch points to be capable, and receptionists to be able to clean their hands or sanitize their hands immediately after such transactions. And clearly any changes in terms and conditions, think where you're going to put it. Don't overburden the centre with too much information. Okay, next sign. Now, this is an interesting slide in that we think there's some good and bad practice here, or issues that are unnecessary. So think about the types of signs, where you're going to display it, whether it's graphics, freestanding signs, wall mounted. And also think that hopefully in years to come, much of this signage might be able to be taken away. So just consider where you're placing it, how it's damaging the fabric of the building by displaying it. Reception, clearly you're going to need to be displaying social distancing, hygiene advice, payment arrangements. Take a step back outside. The distancing, if you anticipate and regularly get queues, then clearly you might need to think about the 2 metre tapes on the floor and some form of queuing system, preferably to divert people under cover so that you're not getting people wet while they're queuing if it rains. We've been very fortunate in the last few months with the weather we've had during this lockdown period. Circulation areas and lifts. Lifts, we feel you should be perhaps encouraging people on the outside, unless they have a physical disability that requires the lift, they should walk. Please do not use the lift unless you have no other option. And then the lift perhaps should be used on a one-to-one only basis, or a one person plus a person that they live in the same household with. The sign there shows that that could have 2 people in it. Frankly, at this point in time, I wouldn't necessarily feel comfortable getting in that lift unless it was somebody from my own household. So some simple, easy solutions rather than having to tape the inside of a lift floor, which seems a bit over the top. Again, in other circulation areas, encouraging people after they've touched touch points to sanitize their hands. Activity areas, you might want to think again about somehow setting parameters for maximum capacities. We would put one caveat on that. It's essential through your risk assessment that whatever you set, you are able to live with. So in a dance studio, for instance, you might well have a capacity of X for yoga and a lot less capacity if it's a high impact class. So how are you going to show the 2 different capacities within that area? Only set signage that you can live to. There are other better control measures in the hierarchy of control through staff supervision, your booking systems that might be able to manage that process. Social distancing, dots on floors. You can see on the desk there they've put a red dot and a green dot to show how people should be spaced out at the desks. Similar things can be done perhaps on the floors in dance studios to show where people should stand and not stand. Toilets and changing rooms behind cubicle doors, encouraging people to wash their hands properly. Staff areas, you might well need an occupancy level on your staff room, saying no more than 1 or 2 staff to be in this room at any one time. And think through the other areas that you do have direct control over on what additional signage you're going to need to encourage staff to make sure they adhere to good hygiene practices to help minimise the risk to themselves as well as your customers. And think overall about the notices, signage and information that you need on your website. For example, please don't come if you feel unwell. Next slide, please. Is this flipped over? Right, okay. I think this probably sums it up. To ensure that signage is effective and portrays the messages you want to get across, you must keep it simple. The more complicated, people won't read it. It needs to be consistent, follow the current advice and guidance, and I'm sorry that might mean occasionally that we have to update signage because at the moment it's a moving feast. Hopefully as things improve, we will be able to reduce some of the controls that we're inevitably having to put in place. So make sure that once it's up, you continue to review it. Make sure it's professionally presented, it's striking, it doesn't get confused with the other information, using consistent fonts. Make sure you check spelling and grammar. I know that's simple, and hopefully your provider will do that as well, but where you're putting text in, again, make sure it's consistent and properly spelt. Ensure it's prominent and doesn't blend into your other signage. You might, whereas you want a corporate approach, you might think of having a completely different colour that is different than other signage, bearing in mind people with dyslexia who might not be able to see every bit of colour or make it difficult for them to read. Make it appropriate for the environment. Certainly if you're putting stuff on the floor, you should consider whether it's slip and wear resistant, and make sure you put in a regular review process. And that final thing, consider how you're eventually going to remove it. Permanent paint sprays all the way down your corridor are not going to do you or your client any good in years to come, if and when we finally get on top of this current situation. And I think that's it. Is there one more, or is it over to you, Caroline?
Just a couple of things I thought I'd just add that might help. They're silly little things, but you could quite easily put little stickers on screens of laptops, on telephones, that say, remember to sanitize if you've been handling money, those sort of things. Little tiny hints. You could put a screensaver on everybody's computer screens to say, you know, wash your hands before you go anywhere. The hand washing bit is still deemed to be the best form of prevention. So the more we can encourage our staff to wash their hands, the better. The other thing that we need to just mention, we have covered it in cleaning and hygiene already, is sanitizer stations, where you're going to put them and how many of them. Just to reiterate what we said last time, don't put them where there are no staff and the sanitizer can get stolen. Make sure that they are in visible areas to the staff, and also in the right areas near activities and touch points. And again, just one last thing, please make sure that you get signage that you could, Big Wave, for example, are doing some fantastic banners and like ice cream outside, you know, this like the signs you get outside corner shops. They're brilliant because you could potentially order different signs to go in them at another time. So whatever you're spending, is it something that you can actually have longevity with and change in the future? So just have a think about, potentially it may be slightly more expensive to buy more heavy duty stuff, but that may be able to be used in the future rather than the stuff that we're just going to use for COVID and then throw away. So hopefully there are extra bits. So just to reiterate what we can offer you, if you do need support in any of the writing of risk assessments, mobilisations or inspections, please come through to us on info at Right Directions.